This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
All right, there he is, the man, the myth, the legend that is Ira Winderman. How are you doing, sir? Good morning.
I am doing good. Good morning to you and everyone out there in our Acura Pembroke Pines report. I'm doing good. Trying to see if he can close out a 2-1 road trip, keep that momentum going up to number 6 in the Eastern Conference. It's like we knew it would come. We just didn't know when it would come. And for all those who panicked, the Heat just always have a way of making themselves relevant. And we're at that stage again right now.
Yeah, let's hope they can continue. And I think it's because people are kind of finding their roles. Others have kind of elevated their roles, like Bam. I can't say enough about Bam, how he has now imposed his offensive will now, night in and night out. And I think that's incredibly important. And, the good thing is that he's doing it within his own constraints, because we a lot of us, he's got to step outside and be a stretch 5 and all that kind of stuff. And no, he doesn't. Okay, that's not who he is. And maybe eventually he could, develop that shot on a consistent basis, but he's so good everywhere else, from a regular mid-range jump shot to something around the paint to of course, attacking the rim. So there are so many areas where he can score. And what I like is that he is aggressively finding his spots and really taking over. And I think that that's also made a difference too, because the first third of the season, no, not even that. I would say like the first quarter of the season, there was a lot of inconsistencies and we were kind of waiting for him to kind of take off. But over that last, month or something now, he's really like taken off right now. And it's a different Bam. It's fun to watch.
And credit Eric Spoelstra for also going to Bam. And he had a very good quote after the game the other night when he said, "We can't go more than a couple of possessions without getting the ball to Bam." And it's interesting. When you looked at this team going into the season, you would say it was Jimmy Butler's team, get the ball to Jimmy. Right. You would say Tyler Hero moving in the starting lineup, get the ball to Tyler. And now they've realized their identity is this guy who at one point was viewed as having no offensive game. I mean, you remember the great saw about Dean Smith was the only guy who could stop Michael Jordan from scoring was Dean Smith, the way he played him at Carolina. It's almost now as if the only guy who could keep Bam from scoring was John Calipari, the way he played him at Kentucky. And you get to see, this is what you want when you draft. And Big O, you talk about this a lot with the Dolphins also. You don't want to draft a finished product. You want to draft someone that your scouting department says can grow, can become more down the road. That's what Bam has been. I mean, it's interesting. Eric Spoelstra mentioned this. You could almost consider Bam Adebayo for your most improved player award every year of his growth, because there have been those steps defensively, then offensively, then as a go-to player. We're seeing that. That's what you want out of draft choices. You don't want a guy who stagnates, who you draft him and he is what he is and he won't become much better. Bam's growth has been, almost exponential. And we're seeing that right now. And to Eric Spoelstra's credit, he is feeding the beast.
Yeah, and the other guy is Gabe Vincent, who now, because of what Lowry, he's kind of opened the door for him. And then by opening the door, Gabe has kind of kicked it down. And to kind of ask you in following up, and I was talking about this yesterday, once Oladipo started playing, the key thing that I kept talking to you about is I look at his minutes. I look at his minutes every night to see how many minutes is he playing. Is his body holding up? Okay, if his body holds up, then everything else should start to fall into place. And sure enough, he's played his best basketball now. His body's holding up. So now, is this something I got to start looking at? Because I started to look at it the other night. Gave Vincent 26 minutes, Lowry 22 minutes. And so while one starts and the other one comes off the bench, well, who's the guy that's going to get the more minutes? And I'm wondering, is this something or a sign of things to come here where maybe Gabe Vincent's going to start getting more minutes than Kyle Lowry?
Well, let's be honest. That was Kyle's first game back in 5. He had missed 4. Eric Spoelstra said he's not on a minutes count. We're going to be careful. It was a blowout win, which we never get down here. So Jimmy and Kyle didn't have to play late, so that's a little different. What we're seeing more is, look, at the end game, Eric Spoelstra has already shown us he will play the players who were playing best that night as his final 5. So we have to wait and see. But what we're seeing now, and I wrote it about in the SunSentinel.com today, is with the Heat now getting their lineup back, people are now falling into their roles. The Heat bench had been pretty terrible for a large part of the season,
Yes.
primarily because the bench was also starting. Now look at your bench. You have Victor Oladipo, who's really been producing well. You have Gabe Vincent. You have Max Strus. You now have that perimeter locked in your second unit where you can cycle through other guys because everyone knows their role. We've been waiting all year. Everyone's been looking at the Heat starting lineup and going, oh, they're only 7-8 and they're 15 starts. It's not a great unit, even though they have a very good net rating. No, but it cycles through the roster, through the rotation. Not only are you settling your starting lineup, but you're settling your rotation also. Now you're getting to that 8 deep. You throw a center in there, you're set with your 9 deep. This is what health does for you. This is what you wait for to get everyone, all your ducks lined up in order. That's what they have right now. It'll be interesting as they step up in competition. Dallas tonight with the Mavericks coming off a loss to Atlanta. Then next week, that big Boston national television game. I think that'll be a real litmus test because we saw the Celtics last night against the Warriors. They are a damn good team. But if you remember, December 1st, the game that Jimmy Butler came back in Boston, they had that epic win at TD Garden. The Heat get up for the big games. I'm really curious about that game next week.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a lot of fun. It's a nice litmus test to where they're at, and they're better now. They're deeper. Let me ask you something. The Dedmon situation. Has Dedmon kind of played his way in a role to being a throw-in in some kind of a trade now down the line? 2, has that opened up the door more for Orlando Robinson? And 3, what is the status of Yurtseven?
Yeah, it's interesting. That was one of my Ask Ira questions today. All I can tell you about Omar Yurtseven is this, is he had been tooling around in one of those scooters that you put your knee up as you ride along because his ankle was bad. That's gone. He is now ambulatory. That's good. He's walking. He's wearing this sort of plastic brace that goes from his ankle to his knee. So he's not out of the woods yet. So probably about another month or so, the All-Star break would be a natural sort of next go point for him. It's interesting with all these daily fantasy sites. I'd almost like to see a proposition nightly. Will Dwayne Dedmon play? Because since he was suspended, that one game for conduct detrimental for the team, he has not played at all in the 3 games since. I'm not so sure he ever plays another game for the Miami Heat. He'll be there. He'll fill out the roster. He'll give them 8 available bodies when they need. But I think what he did crossed the line. I don't think it played well in the locker room. You saw the guys talking on the bench after he stormed off, almost laughing about how angry he got. And now that Orlando Robinson is playing well, the problem is Orlando Robinson only has about 17 or 18 more games on his 2-way contract that he could be in a Heat uniform. The one thing I've always said about Andy Ellisberg and Adam Simon and Pat Riley in their front office, they find a way to make necessary things happen. If they need more Orlando Robinson, they will find a way to convert him to a standard deal. Dwayne Dedmon, from the moment he signed in July, when you and I are out in Vegas in Summer League, was always meant to be a filler in a trade. There's a reason they more than doubled his salary from last season. It gives them that nice sweet spot starting January 15th, this past Sunday, that they could throw him into a deal. So if you're asking me this, Big O, is Dwayne Dedmon more valuable as a player or as a trade piece for the Heat? It clearly is as a trade piece and maybe always was, especially now that they found someone in Orlando Robinson. And what I'll say about Orlando Robinson is this. He doesn't get in the way. Sometimes that's all you need. When you have that second unit with Oladipo, with Vincent, with Strus, just get out of the way. Offensive rebounds, defend a little, set some screens, use your 5 fouls. Sometimes I think Dwayne Dedmon got in the way because he still wanted to be a factor. He was shooting those 3-pointers. He maybe was forcing the ball a little bit. He was setting the moving screens. It's interesting how that's playing out. If Yurtseven comes around, they are fine at center.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. And listen, I love Orlando Robinson's energy too. That's the other thing, that the kid does play hard all the time. So that's why I kind of asked, because I noticed the other night Dedmon was a pretty strong cheerleader.
Yes, and he has been that, and I'm glad you pointed that out. He is rising on the bench. Look, I think he read the Riot Act. You know, when he said he spoke to Spo and he said he spoke to Pat, going to Pat is like going to the principal's, the dean's office. You know that you're sort of getting a talking to. We doubled your salary. You do what we say. This was part of the agreement, and you go forward from there. So that's a big part of it also. And, you know, again, the 1-game suspension basically is all they could do, or else you get appeals and you have to deal with all that. They made their statement. They're moving forward. They're not making him stay home. They want to make him seem he's a viable guy. I spoke to Kurt Heelan on our RateRecover.com Inside the Paint show on Wednesday. Maybe a team like the Clippers, desperate for a backup big man, takes a flyer, and you can get something out of him. You know, it was interesting. Even Zach Lowe wrote today in his 10 Things at ESPN, he does every Friday. He said, yeah, the Heat are good enough now to consider trade possibilities because you can see how a little subtle tweak, how one more piece could move them up even a little bit further. They've played themselves into relevancy. And the other thing I'll say to you, Big O, is this. We always talk about the March 1 buyout deadline. When guys come free to finish the season somewhere, we see this in all sports.
Sure.
And I told you, if the Heat weren't good on March 1, no one's going to say, hey, I want to go play in the play-in. No player is taking a buyout from Team A to go to Team B for the play-in. But if the Heat show they're for real, I think that changes things. Then some of those buyout candidates, maybe even Jay Crowder, then say, hey, I could get a playoff run with that team. The Heat's upgrade has come at the right time when it's come to the standings.
Duncan Robinson, what's the usage for Duncan Robinson? What can they do to try to move him? What can they do to try to showcase him? Duncan Robinson, what do you do with that spot?
This is an aggregator's dream, so I'm glad that you get your 60 million downloads so someone can aggregate this next comment I'm going to make. The Miami Heat have to trade Duncan Robinson. And they have to trade him not for any particular Duncan Robinson reason or anything Duncan is in the rotation or not, but for this reason. Max Strus is a free agent after the season, an unrestricted free agent. He has shown us in the last 2 weeks, he got double-digit rebounds the other night.
10
he got
assists
double-digit assists for the first time in his life, he said, on any level in the game on Wednesday night. So he's showing you his versatility, but you cannot have Duncan Robinson on a 5-year, $90 million contract and then also offer something similar to Max Strus. There's too much duplication and overlap. So the Heat almost have to move off Duncan to take care of Max, or else it's going to get really interesting, Big O. If you have to carry the Bam extension, the Hero extension, the Jimmy Butler max deal, maybe one more year of Kyle Lowry, you can't be carrying big money for Duncan.
Oh my God, they might pay luxury tax.
No, you're talking massive payroll instability and inability to do other things. It's going to be interesting to see if they can move off Duncan. I've said it all along. I think it's going to take a sweetener, or maybe it's someone else's bad contract with fewer years. But again, I don't like to get ahead of myself. But the bottom line is this. Max will be a free agent in the offseason. Gabe Vincent will be a free agent in the offseason. Omar Yurtseven will be restricted but a free agent in the offseason. You have to think at the trading deadline about what comes next as well.
Okay. All right. So one more thing I got to ask you before we go. And we always say this is a Miami Heat and NBA segment. So I want to go over the NBA part of this. And I read this story about, the Westbrook situation with the Lakers. And some people are saying, and, one of the things we've talked about here where Riley, lately has done some things over the last few years where he's kind of let the inmates run the asylum. Hey, why don't you draft Shabazz for me? Hey, why don't you go get Kyle Lowry for me? And it's really bit you in the ass by listening to the people that shouldn't be running the team. You know what I mean? In fact, you were pissing LeBron off because you traded Mike Miller, Mike Miller made Humpty Dumpty look like he was all put together with no problem. So Pelinka and Buss, they're saying that pretty much they're refusing to move their future picks to unload Westbrook on somebody else so they can make a move for somebody else. And that's because they listened to LeBron and AD about bringing Russ in, and it didn't fit. It didn't work. They're still a bad team. And, Russ is playing at least off the bench and all that stuff. So you tell me, what the hell is going on in LA? Do you believe any of this, that Pelinka and Buss are kind of like, no, man, we're not giving up the future now because you guys wanted us to get Russell Westbrook? And again, it kind of reminds me of the situation with Riley and Jimmy Butler kind of screwed himself by wanting his best friend on the team.
I don't believe that for this reason. If that's the reason and they really had some angst with LeBron, then they would just trade LeBron. He can't be traded this season because of extension. He can be traded in the offseason. Maybe that's the way they go. But when you go and deal with a superstar, especially in the NBA where only 5 players play at a time, you are all in or you're not at all. So you might say what the Heat did with Jimmy Butler, bringing in his friend Kyle Lowry, was wrong. That's life with a superstar in the NBA. Remember, Jimmy
Yeah.
had his extension deadline, didn't. With the
Again.
Lakers, when you bring LeBron in, you either go all in or not at all. That's the way it is in the NBA these days. Look at Kevin Durant. He wanted James Harden, then he didn't want James Harden. He wanted Kyrie, then he was worried about Kyrie. The NBA is a deal with the devil league. If you get one of those top 5, top 10 players, you were all in with them. So for Rob Pelinka or Jeannie Buss to say now, oh, LeBron led us astray, no. You picked up LeBron and you agreed to go astray because that's what you do with an elite talent in the NBA. This isn't the NFL where we have 22 starters. This isn't MLB where you have 9 or 10 starters with the DH. This is a league where one player makes that much difference. You capitulate, just like the Bulls did to Michael Jordan to torment Jerry Krause. That's what happens over the years. So the Lakers went all in on LeBron, as they should have. The Cavaliers went all in with LeBron and made some good moves. They traded the draft rights for Wiggins for Kevin Love. They surrounded LeBron with quality talent. It worked there. The Miami Heat did the same thing. LeBron wanted a shot blocker, Chris Anderson. LeBron wanted a shooter, Ray Allen. LeBron wanted a defender after they lost in Dallas.
Yeah, he didn't specifically say go get Ray Allen. They went and got Ray Allen.
But he
didn't specifically say Chris Bird.
Okay.
They went and out.
Okay. But what he did is
specifically said Lowry and specifically wanted Shabazz Napier.
But what LeBron did is he pulled aside Orlando Alzugaray in the locker room and say we could use another defender. He made it known. That's what you do with superstars in the NBA. What Jimmy Butler wants, Jimmy Butler gets, because Pat Riley understands. This isn't the Showtime Lakers. This isn't the Knicks where he's suspending Anthony Mason. It's a different time and a different era, and old people like you and I have to just agree that times have changed in the NBA. The stars do run the asylum. Why? It's a star-driven league.
Oh, you can make a suggestion. Okay, good. Now go back to the court, go back to the field. We'll go find the player. That's not a problem. I don't have a problem.
But it does not work that way, because then players sit out games, then players brood, and then you get into ugly situations where you have to tell players to stay away. The John Wall situation, situations like that. That, unfortunately, is where it goes in this league.
Heat are favored by 1.5 tonight. Do you know that?
Well, Christian Wood is out. He hurt his thumb the other day. I got to tell you, Dallas is an all-or-nothing team. When their supporting players play well, and Tim Hardaway Jr. always seems to kill the Heat.
Right,
when their supporting players play well, they're very good. But once they let Jalen Brunson go, Mark Cuban basketball savant, there's not a lot of support there for Luka Doncic. And the one thing about Eric Spoelstra, if you give him a day to game plan, this is not a back-to-back. I guarantee you, Eric Spoelstra and his support staff are all sitting there in Dallas, putting together their quote-unquote Jeremy Lin plan. How do we stop one guy? You'll see Caleb on him. You'll see Bam on him. You'll see Jimmy on him. You might see double teams. I trust Eric Spoelstra to strategize against this singular superstar. He has done it every stage of his career. I'm really curious to see what Eric Spoelstra comes up tonight with. 7:30 ESPN, Bally Sports Sun against the Mavericks.
Christian Wood, is that a player the Heat could have had?
Well, you talk about the machinations this offseason and what they did or what they didn't do and what they did or didn't offer. He was an interesting name. They were interested. Dallas was able to outbid them with what they offered to Houston, but it would have been a very curious name, and that's why you're hearing the Heat linked to all these power forwards. So one that got away, hey, when he was in Detroit, I thought he was just a numbers guy, but he still hasn't taken that next step. He's been good in Dallas this year, but he hasn't necessarily been great. Look, Caleb Martin's been pretty good. Let that kid return to health. And
but he's not a real power forward, whereas Christian Wood is a real power forward.
I agree, and you need to get that. February 9th, I think the week of February 9th, I'll be on every day with you, whether it's an Acura Pembroke Pines report or RedRecover.com Inside the Paint. I think the Heat will be very active, looking at every single name that Orlando Alzugaray mentions.
I would have liked Christian Wood in a Heat uniform. That would have been actually pretty nice. All right, what are you working on the Sun Sentinel so folks can check you out, my friends?
Today I wrote a story about the Heat starting lineup, only 15 games together, but it makes the whole team better, so I investigated that. I also wrote in my Ask Ira how when the whole roster is together, all of a sudden the bench is pretty good, as we mentioned here. So I'm looking into that, and I'll have Sunday coverage. I'm going to do a story on Max Strus and how this guy has been asked to start, come off the bench, be a power forward, small forward, shooting guard. And he really has been the jack of all trades that in many ways has been the glue to holding the season together. So that'll be on your doorstep on Sunday.
And follow him on Twitter at Ira Heatbeat. And you can catch him again on Monday. My Heat and NBA report. And then on Wednesday with, of course, our Red Recover Inside the Paint show. Ira, as always, thank you, my friend. Appreciate you.
Back here Monday selling more cars. Thanks, Big O.
Have a great weekend, my friend. There you go. Ira Winderman. Should be fun tonight. I'll be watching the Heat and the Mavs tonight, man. Hails to the yeah.
This is the